Good afternoon, everybody. Let's see what's cooking in Bert's kitchen today. I've made a decision. Today it's going to be meatloaf. Something simple, something everybody's had in their lifetime, and usually there's a whole lot of jokes made about it. But trust me, this meatloaf is going to be a recipe you're going to want to keep around, because not only are people going to go, well, at least it's tolerable. No, they're going to actually want more of this. So, first thing we got to get, nice bowl for mixing everything in, into which we're going to place 1.5 pounds of ground beef. Now, you can use 1 pound of ground beef and maybe some ground pork, or ground veal, or a combination of all three, or whatever you like. But if you're like me and you're dead broke poor, you're going to be going with the 70-30 ground beef. Next thing we got to do is turn this meat into something that we can mash into or mold into a loaf. And the first thing you're going to need there is an egg. 1 egg. Now we're going to add some flavor components. Ketchup, a couple of tablespoons of ketchup. I never really measured this out. I've kind of figured it out over the years. What the measurements actually look like. Mustard, a couple tablespoons of mustard. And Worcestershire sauce. Don't ever make a meatloaf without Worcestershire sauce. Probably about a tablespoon, maybe a tablespoon and a half. Now we're going to add in our dry ingredients. Cumin. Love to use the cumin. Gives it a nice smoky flavor, especially if you don't have bacon on hand to lay over top of it, which just creates more of a mess anyway. So the cumin. We're going to add in there, probably about half a tablespoon. Onion powder. I prefer this to chopped onions. Chopped onions are nice. They give it a different texture, but the onion powder, when it cooks out, gives it a much stronger onion flavor. But if you want to use regular onions, go ahead, please chop up an onion. Now I'm probably going to use about a teaspoon of that. About a teaspoon of garlic powder. Again, if you want to, go ahead, please chop up real garlic. I'm just working with what I've got in my dry pantry today because I'm trying to get it cleaned out. Salt. A couple of nice, good pinches. And then black pepper. Fair bit of black pepper, as much as you like. Now, that all seems kind of liquid. What's going to bind it all together? Plain old breadcrumbs. I'm looking at probably about maybe a half, 3/4 of a cup there. We'll start with that. If it's still a little too moist for you, add a few more as you go along. And then the only way to mix this is get your hands right in there. So make sure, please, make sure you wash them really well. This is going to be a quick video. Not a whole lot to making a meatloaf. While we've got it in the oven, I'll teach you how to make a nice gravy to go right over top of it. Make sure everything in there is nice and well combined. Now trust me, you're not going to need to spray down your pan, but you're going to need a loaf pan, something like this. If you don't have that, get a regular old flat baking sheet and line it with some tin foil shape your meat into a loaf and set it on there. It'll cook just fine. Personally, I like using these loaf pans, and you'll see why when this comes out, especially if you're using a less expensive cut of meat, like I am, a good 70-30. That's 30% fat, 70% lean. Okay, so here we have a meatloaf set in a nice loaf pan. It's ready to go into a preheated 350-degree oven. It's going to cook for, checking it about 50 minutes. Make sure it's cooked all the way through. An hour isn't going to kill you, but an hour is about the right amount of time. Okay, so let's make a gravy now. Here on the stove, I got a nice saucepan with a cup and a half of water in it. Everybody's got these sitting in their pantry somewhere. A beef bouillon cube. You want to throw 2 of them in there. As such, bring it up to a boil. That's going to make our beef stock. If you have beef stock around, if you have a can of beef broth or a box of beef stock from the supermarket, or you got Ambitious and made your own, well, if you got Ambitious and made your own, you probably know how to make gravy, so we want about a cup and a half here. Now, while we're waiting for that to boil, we're going to talk about thickening up your gravy. Most people try and use flour, you put it into the boiling liquid, and you wind up with lumps and a mess, and etc., etc. You can use that Wonder flour, blah, blah, blah. We're going to make this a little bit easier on you. We're going to make what's called a slurry. What a slurry is cornstarch and a liquid. Everybody's got a jar of cornstarch or something around their house like this. We'll bust this open. 3 or 4 tablespoons of that. Do it in a measuring cup. And then add milk to bring it up to about 3/4 of a cup. And mix that all together nice. And it's going to seem kind of thin, but trust me, when you add it to your boiling liquid, boom, you got the milk for the creaminess, you got this cornstarch, it's just going to thicken your gravy right up. You'll have a perfect gravy to which you can then add as much salt and pepper as you like. Okay, so we now have our beef broth here. It had come to a boil. I turned the heat off because when you boil milk, it, well, just makes kind of a mess. What you want to do is get a whisk, start stirring this in. Now you can put the heat back on. But keep stirring as you're going along, because if you've ever tried to boil milk before and you've turned your back, the second you do, it's all over the place. Get it on a fairly medium-high heat. If your burners go up to 10, then, you know, somewhere around a 6.5, 7. Wouldn't go much higher than that. It's going to seem kind of thin, but as you keep stirring it, you'll feel it thickening up. And it only takes that long. That's when you taste it. Needs a pinch of salt. A little black pepper. Stir it in. Now you've got yourself a nice thick gravy for your meatloaf. Perfect consistency. Now all we have to do is wait for the meatloaf to come out of the oven. Okay, so it's been an hour. The meatloaf's come out. Let it sit for about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and that way it'll all the juices will flow back into the middle, and it won't be dry. It'll also continue to cook another degree or two, and you know, get to exactly the right temperature. But after an hour, you're good to go. Slice yourself off a hunk, set it on a plate with some French fries. Guarantee your kids will be happy to eat dinner that night. They're not going to give you any grief. And there you have one beautiful plate of meatloaf. Very simple, easy dinner. It takes a few minutes to put it together with stuff you got in your pantry. Throw it in the oven for an hour. Serve some fries next to it. Boom, your kids will eat. You won't have any problems. Stop back next time. See what's cooking in Bert's Kitchen.